Beneath the ominous glow of the blood moon, Crimson Peak stood tall and foreboding, its jagged edges cutting into the sky like the fangs of some ancient beast. Mira gazed up at the cursed mountain, her breath catching in her throat as a shiver ran down her spine. The legend spoke of the blood moon god, a being forgotten by time but awakened when the moon turned red, a harbinger of death and despair. With her companions, Viktor and Thalia, she had come to confront this ancient terror. The wind howled around them, whispering tales of past sacrifices and unfulfilled vengeance. The climb up the treacherous mountain was slow and dangerous, the path littered with jagged rocks and loose earth. Viktor, ever the stoic warrior, led the way, his eyes scanning the shadows as if expecting something to leap out at them at any moment. Thalia, with her sharp mind and knowledge of ancient lore, clutched a weathered tome of forgotten gods, her fingers trembling with both anticipation and dread. Mira, the one destined to face the blood moon god, felt the weight of the prophecy pressing down on her. The closer they came to the peak, the heavier the air grew, thick with the scent of blood and decay. As they approached the summit, the ruins of an ancient temple came into view, its once grand spires crumbling, overtaken by the relentless force of nature. The temple's black stone walls shimmered under the blood moon's light, giving it an otherworldly glow. The trio paused at the temple's entrance, the air still and unnervingly quiet. "This is it," Thalia whispered, her voice barely audible. Mira nodded, her hand tightening around the hilt of her blade. They could feel the presence of something far greater than themselves, a god, waiting. Inside the temple, the darkness was suffocating. The walls were adorned with carvings of ancient rituals, sacrifices made in the name of the blood moon god. Mira ran her fingers over the cold stone, the images telling a story of a people who once worshipped this deity in exchange for power, only to be consumed by the god's insatiable hunger. A sudden gust of wind echoed through the temple, sending chills down her spine. "We're not alone," Viktor muttered, drawing his sword. The shadows seemed to shift and pulse as if the mountain itself was alive. Then, with a low rumble, the ground beneath them shook, and a voice, deep, ancient, and filled with malice, rumbled through the air. "You have come to awaken me, mortals. You shall serve as the first to witness my return." The trio froze as the temperature dropped, their breath visible in the chilling air. The blood moon god had spoken. The air grew colder as they stepped inside the temple, the walls towering above them like the bones of a long-dead giant. Mira's heart pounded in her chest as their footsteps echoed through the empty halls. Viktor moved cautiously, his sword raised while Thalia clung to her tome, whispering incantations meant to ward off evil. Strange symbols adorned the walls, pulsating faintly with an unnatural light. "These are marks of devotion," Thalia murmured, her brow furrowed. "Worship of the blood moon god. But something is off." As they ventured deeper, the walls seemed to close in, the air thickening with each step. Shadows danced along the stone floors, and whispers filled the air, though there was no one in sight. Mira could feel something watching them, its presence pressing down like a weight on her soul. "We're being hunted," Viktor said grimly, his eyes scanning the shifting darkness. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the chamber, freezing them in place. From the shadows, a beast emerged, its form twisted, with crimson eyes glowing in the dark, a herald of the god they sought to confront. Without hesitation, Viktor lunged at the creature, his sword gleaming under the faint light of the moon seeping through cracks in the ceiling. The beast snarled and retaliated with immense force, knocking him back into a stone pillar. Mira drew her blade, her instincts screaming at her to run, but she held her ground. "This is only the beginning," Thalia whispered, backing toward the shadows as she searched for a way out. The temple seemed to pulse in rhythm with the battle, as if the structure itself was alive. Mira slashed at the creature, narrowly dodging its razor-sharp claws. With each hit, She could feel the beast's power surging, as if it drew strength from the very mountain. In the midst of the chaos, Thalia's voice rang out. "Mira, we need to leave. The blood moon feeds it." But Mira hesitated, her gaze locking onto a strange artifact embedded in the temple wall, a twisted blood-red stone that pulsed with dark energy. Could this be the key to their survival, or their doom? Viktor pushed himself to his feet, his armor dented and bloodied. "Go! Now!" he shouted as the creature turned its attention back to him, its growl reverberating through the chamber. Thalia grabbed Mira's arm, pulling her away from the battle. They ran through the temple's winding halls, but Mira couldn't shake the feeling that the artifact had more to reveal, something vital to their mission. But for now, survival was all that mattered. Mira and Thalia raced through the dark corridors of the temple, their footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The beast's roars still reverberated through the walls, and the pulse of the mountain seemed to quicken with each step. As they turned a corner, they found themselves in a vast chamber at the heart of the temple. In the center stood an altar, and embedded in the stone was the blood-red artifact they had seen earlier, glowing brighter than ever, as if feeding on the power of the blood moon. "This is it," Thalia whispered, her voice trembling. "The heart of the blood moon god." Mira approached the altar, her hand hovering over the artifact. The air was thick with power, and she could feel the pull of the ancient god deep within the stone. She knew that taking it would awaken the full might of the god, but leaving it would doom them all. "What choice do we have?" she murmured, her fingers brushing the stone's surface. Before she could decide, the chamber darkened as the beast emerged from the shadows, its crimson eyes locking onto them. It moved slowly this time, as if savouring the moment, its monstrous form filling the room. "It's too late," Thalia said, her voice barely above a whisper. The beast let out a deafening roar, shaking the very foundation of the temple. Mira drew her sword, standing between the beast and the altar, ready to face the god's wrath. As the beast lunged, Mira braced for impact, but at the last second the artifact exploded with light. A wave of power surged through the room, freezing the beast in mid-air. The light was blinding, and Mira could feel the presence of something ancient and incomprehensible fill the chamber. The beast writhed in agony as the light tore it apart, and for a moment Mira thought they had won. But then the ground shook violently, and a voice, deeper and more malevolent than anything they had ever heard, boomed through the chamber. "Foolish mortals, you cannot stop the return of a god." The mountain trembled, and from the shadows, a massive godlike figure began to take shape. The blood moon god had awoken, and the real battle had only just begun. The air in the chamber grew heavy as the blood moon god began to fully manifest, its immense form towering above them. Mira stumbled backward, her heart pounding as the god's crimson eyes opened, filled with ancient malice. The once frozen beast lay shattered on the temple floor, its power nothing compared to the force now awakening. Viktor limped into the room, his eyes widening at the sight of the god. "We're too late," he whispered, the weight of their failure pressing down on them. The temple itself seemed to come alive, pulsing in rhythm with the god's presence. Shadows writhed along the walls, and the very ground beneath them trembled. Thalia flipped through her ancient tome, desperately searching for any final means of stopping the god's full return. "There has to be something," she muttered, her voice shaking. Mira could feel the god's gaze settle on her, and she knew that whatever chance they had left rested in her hands. The blood-red artifact still pulsed with power on the altar, its light dimming as the god's form grew stronger. Mira approached it once more, her hands trembling. She could hear the god's voice in her mind, ancient, commanding, offering her a terrible choice. "Submit to me, and I will spare your world," the god whispered, its voice filling her with both dread and temptation. Mira clenched her fists, knowing that the price of submission would be far too high. "Mira, don't listen," Viktor called, his voice hoarse from the battle. Thalia nodded, her eyes wide with fear. If you submit, everything we fought for will be lost. Mira turned to face her companions, her heart torn between the fate of her world and the unimaginable power she could wield. The god's voice grew louder, more insistent, as the temple walls began to crumble under its might. Mira had to make her decision now, before it was too late. In a final act of defiance, Mira raised her sword and plunged it into the artifact. A shockwave of light erupted from the altar, shattering the temple and sending the blood moon god's form into the shadows. The ground cracked beneath them, and Mira fell to her knees, her strength nearly spent. The god's roar echoed through the crumbling chamber, but its form began to fade, the connection to its power severed. The price had been paid, but the cost of their victory was yet to be fully realized. The temple was in ruins, the ground fractured and broken beneath Mira's feet. The shockwave had destroyed much of the ancient structure, leaving it barely standing, but the blood moon god's form had faded into the shadows. Mira's breath was ragged, her strength nearly gone, but the realization that they had stopped the god's return filled her with grim satisfaction. Viktor and Thalia approached, their faces pale but filled with relief. "It's over," Viktor whispered, though the weight of their victory still hung heavy in the air. But as they made their way toward the temple's crumbling entrance, a low, guttural voice echoed through the halls. "Fools! You cannot defeat a god!" Mira froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The ground beneath them trembled, and the shadows that had once housed the god's form began to shift and swirl. The blood moon. God was not gone. It had merely retreated, waiting for the moment to strike again. And in that instant, Mira realized the terrible truth. The god wasn't a simple beast or curse. It was a being of unimaginable power, an ancient deity whose return marked the end of humanity's era. "We have to leave," Thalia urged, panic seeping into her voice. "It's not over. It never was." Mira's hand tightened on the hilt of her sword as she turned back to the altar. The blood-red artifact was gone, destroyed by the shockwave, but the god's presence remained. It was as if the very mountain was alive, the air thick with its malevolence. "We only delayed it," Mira whispered. "The god will rise again." As they escaped from the collapsing temple, the blood moon still hung high in the sky, casting its crimson glow over the land. They had stopped the god's full manifestation, but the blood moon's presence was a warning, a signal that the world was forever changed. "This isn't a victory," Viktor said solemnly, his eyes scanning the horizon. "The blood moon god will return, and next time it will be stronger." Mira glanced up at the blood moon, a deep sense of foreboding settling over her. The ancient god had been awakened, and though they had survived this encounter, the world would never be the same. The blood moon god was no mere monster. It was a force beyond mortal comprehension, and its reign had only just begun.